So let's start with an Ezra Pound poem. It's called In the Station of the Metro. Here it is in its entirety. The apparition of these faces in the crowd. Petals on a wet black bough. Wow, what a banger, these 2 lines. I guess 3 if you count the title too. There's just so much going on here, right? The slant rhyme of crowd and bow, the crystal clear imagery using minimal words. The meter especially is a big part of the poem. The first line is in iambs, the apparition of these faces in the crowd. Da-da, 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 da-da. Sleepy and regular, it feels and sounds like an ordinary scene at a train station. People, well, faces go by with little notice. But then that second line, bam, instantly, petals. The metrical stress is switched, we go from da-da-da-da to da-da. You're snapped to attention for that wet, black bough. And the central metaphor is just so clear. Faces and petals, a cold, wet, early springtime, white on black. Man, it's just fantastic. But it has got to suck to try and translate this. The content isn't so bad, but the crowd of people I saw at a train station kind of remind me of flower petals on a black tree branch. It's a terrible poem. Poetry is about those tiny nuances, individual words and forms. So what do you choose to keep? You try and force the crowd bow rhyme? Can you build the same or similar meter? Does your language even do meter in a comparable way? And what about the timing of the words? What if your grammar switches around the order of things? Can you maintain the unfolding of the metaphor? The fact that the poem is so short makes everything even harder. Every loss in translation is proportionally so much greater than it would be for a longer work. But okay, in a video presumably about a Chinese poem, why am I talking about Ezra Pound? Well, for one, if you're a monolingual English speaker, hopefully this gives you an idea of the kind of difficulties we might encounter in translation. And for two, well, the poem that this video is actually about was written over 1,000 years before Pound's 1913 work. It, along with some other Chinese poems of its time, likely served as inspirations for early Pound's super terse style, and because of that, we can draw a lot of parallels between the two works. So, with that being said, here's 静夜思 by the poet Li Bai. 床前明月光，疑是地上霜。举头望明月，低头思故乡。 If you spoke Chinese growing up, yup, sorry, we're actually doing this poem. If you're not Chinese, let me explain. So the poem I just recited is probably the most famous work in all of Chinese literature. It was written sometime in the 700s AD by Li Bai, and it's been a hit ever since. I'm not kidding when I say that everyone who speaks Chinese knows this poem. It was drilled into our brains since elementary school, there's no escape. The reason why it's so ubiquitous is because it's short, it's simple, and it's really, really good. But unfortunately, it's also extremely hard to translate, due in part to its style, but also largely due to the very language it's rendered in. So let's take a closer look. The very first issue we have to talk about is that the poem isn't even in Chinese. Okay, I'm joking. But it is written in an archaic literary Chinese, which is very different from the Chinese spoken today. Chinese, well, at least Mandarin. When I say Chinese here, I guess I just mean Mandarin since I don't know Canto or any other variety. Doesn't allow for many unique syllables, and each character represents a single syllable only. This means there are a ton of homophones. Take shi, for example. Here, written phonetically, shi could mean to be, or event, or city, or attempt, or, well, like a million other things. You get the point. So, to clarify what shi you mean, Chinese often adds a second character to reinforce the first. So, city would be 城市, for example. But notice how if we just write the character out, we already know that this shi means city. We don't necessarily need the 城. Literary Chinese, being a written language, revels in these kind of omissions. Of course, even written out, shi has shades of implication, administrative or mercantile. So while poems in this style convey meaning extraordinarily concisely, they also open up the depth and complexity latent in each character. And as we shall see, the simultaneous terseness and depth will begin to become somewhat of a theme. Unfortunately, there's not really a meaningful way to convey this sort of register in English. Are you beginning to see the trouble? That being said, we should probably establish a baseline of understanding before we try and go any further. So here's an English translation of the poem that I quite like. It's by American poet and translator David Hinton, titled Thoughts on a Quiet Night. Seeing moonlight here at my bed and thinking it's frost on the ground, I look up, gaze at the mounted moon, then back, dreaming of my old home. Okay, so in the following section, I'm kind of going to shit on old David Hinton here. The point I'm trying to make with my critique isn't that this is a bad translation, but more so that even the best translations will irreparably distort the original text. Keep in mind, this isn't even necessarily a bad thing. Alright, so here we go. If you're paying close attention to when I recited the original Chinese, you might notice something missing in the translation. That's right, it doesn't rhyme. In Li Bai's poem, the lines end on guang, shuang, ming. It's rie. Sorry, I misspoke. Line 3 ends on rie, not ming, and xiang. Hinton chooses not to keep this at all, but Li Bai wrote it like that for a good reason. Just like in the Ezra Pound poem, where a sudden shift in the regular rhythm indicates a snap in the speaker's consciousness, here the break in rhyme on line 3 does something similar. We go from murky doubts about moonlight and frost to the brilliant clarity of the full moon. In Chinese culture, the full moon represents the rare instance of the whole family being together. So, in that shift in rhyme, you can see how the narrator goes from wallowing in a sort of stupor to instantly being struck by a deep homesickness. Hinton actually does preserve the subtle emphasis on the third line, but in a different way. We'll get back to that later. For now, let's take a closer look at that third line in the original Chinese. Here's a word-for-word transliteration of that line. We'll put it next to Hinton's for reference. Zhi means to raise, Tou means head, Wang in this case means gaze, Ming means bright, and Rue means moon. So raise head, gaze bright moon. You see that? Right there in the middle? That's right. Hinton added mountains. Why the fuck did he feel the need to add mountains? Okay, I'm joking. It's an old poem, so there are a couple of different versions out there, and mountains rather than bright is a pretty common variation. What I actually wanted to point out is that Hinton actually made the poem woke. He added pronouns. What do you mean I, huh? Hinton, huh? Li Bai didn't say I. Alright, joking again. So this actually is one of those subtle omissions that literary Chinese likes to make. Normally, in vernacular Chinese, you would need an explicit subject, but here the speaker is implied to be the narrator, and this is something you could see all across this style of poem. To me, though, this creates an effect of depersonalization. A head is raised, but whose? The last line has someone reminiscing about home, but other than in a Cartesian cogito ergo sum sort of way, it never outright says whether that person is I or you or Li Bai or, well, anyone. Certainly someone is being referenced, but only in allusion. A head, a sight, a sinking homesickness. Perhaps it's a command for you to notice and act to play out the scene. Or it's a painting, or it's a diary entry. All three of these, none of them. The text doesn't really say. In a similar vein, one of the coolest poetic features of the Chinese language is the complete lack of verb tense, and this one's actually not unique to literary Chinese. Hinton uses this in an interesting way. His first two lines are present progressive, seeing and thinking. The actions are happening, there's some sense of continuous flow being lost in thought. The third is simple present. Something happens. I look up. In this way, he preserves the draw of attention that was originally implied by the rhyme scheme. And in the fourth, he returns to the present progressive. He's dreaming again. He's dropped back into that long, melancholic homesickness. But I think one of the most beautiful things about the poem is the mixture of the disembodied, not there narrator with the tenseless, timeless strangeness of it all. Just as the poem could be happening to anyone or no one at all, it could be happening at any time or no time. How do you convey that in a language like English that has explicit tenses? Maybe it's impossible. The poem so perfectly walks the tightrope of clarity, the moon, the white frost, the homesickness, and ambiguity, the hazy timelessness, the invisible speaker, the indescribable nostalgia. It's like a broken down memory or a fragilely imagined future. And so while I love Hinton's translation for its clarity, I like to try my hand at a murkier translation. So yeah, I gave it a go too. Let me know what you think and try and pick up how my choices relate to what we discussed here. Here's Quiet Night Thoughts as translated by me. Pale moonlight before a bed, or maybe it's frost instead. Look up at the bright moon, think of home, lower head. With a poem so distant in time and space, in a language so different from the one I'm speaking, it is impossible to simply substitute one set of words for another set of words and expect the depth of language to carry through. But I think that if we take the time to parse the differences in language, and we let a translation stand beside its own dissected self, we can get just a little bit closer to conveying that poem.